I had given, thanks, John. I had provided some examples from the statewide longitudinal data system. Honestly, I don't think they're great examples. Don't tell anyone, but at least they are elevator pitches that have to do with education, and they're surprisingly hard to find. And so I gave you some examples, even if you want to see them as kind of non-examples, because back to Johanna's point, like really there has to be an aspect of storytelling in this. You're going to have to grab people's emotion about inclusion because it's challenging enough work, at least it's perceived that way, that you're going to have to grab their emotion, right? You're going to have to grab some aspect of them that's not just, it's not just making it concrete, although that's really, really important. It's going to have to grab a little bit deeper. So I would say that these are non-examples, but at least it gives you kind of an outline of an elevator pitch. And if you could look at those examples and think if there's any aspect of it you like, or look at other elevator pitches, think about why your inclusion work is important to you and the impact you want it to have. Run it by your team once you've created a draft, see if AI can help make it better, and then share that next draft with your team, and then bring it back to our group next time. So that's all in the chat. Anything about that that you need a little more description of, wasn't quite focused enough? Okay. So next time we will take the time to share those in breakout groups. But today I wanted to ensure that Brittany had enough time to talk about the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education and what they are doing with their systems processes. So the systems change. Carol and Brittany work together. So when they talk about streamlining, they're both thinking about that. Brittany, are you okay with folks asking you questions as you go along, or do you want them to wait for certain times to ask questions?
Oh, I'm totally fine with people asking questions.
Okay.
And while I am like presenting Carol, this is all founded from Carol. So at any point, Carol might be interjecting and also sharing, because this is the work that she began.
Fair.
Are you ready for me to get going?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me just share my screen real quick. And then maybe a little thumbs up from people if you can actually see it would help.
We
Okay, I
can
see
see
it. Great.
it. Looks good.
Fantastic. So one of the things that I really wanted to make connections with for people were grounding what I'm sharing today based on the guiding questions that Jennifer provided us. And if you guys look at the email that was shared, there was like an attachment of the PowerPoint, as well as a document that had a list of a thinking routine on the first page, and then a list of the guiding questions that Jennifer provided us. So I took the guiding questions and kind of wove them into the PowerPoint presentation to help front load the information and connect the information that we are sharing today. And then the thinking routine is intentional for us to help make sense of what MCIE has developed and applied, to give us space and time to think through what you may already know, what you're connecting information with, and then what might be challenging, or how you can extend your learning. So I just want to review the questions attached to the thinking routine. So 3 major questions for you to be circling through as I'm sharing information. So how are any of the ideas or information connected to what you already know? What ideas did you get that broadened your thinking or extended it in different directions? And then what challenges or puzzles emerged for you as we are working through this? And then to Jennifer's question in the beginning, at any point, if you have any questions, please just interrupt, because I will be like, got my blinders on thinking and working through this. So if I don't see a hand raise or catch that someone is interrupting me, please just like unmute yourself and interrupt me. I would really appreciate that. Okay, so one of the first guiding questions, what framework guides your systems change process? So to front load you, the Maryland Coalition has a vision, a theory of action, a school-wide framework, and our MCI process that encompasses that. So that's what we'll talk about first. So the vision that we come to the table with when we are working with a school, a district, a system, or a state is that we are coming from the belief and effort of that each and every child who lives here, meaning in your district or in your neighborhood, belongs in your neighborhood school. All children are general education students, and some also receive services. So we don't have we don't have special ed students. We have students who receive special education services. There are no inclusion classes. Everybody is included. If you have inclusion classes, that means that you must have segregated classes. So that's why we don't name them inclusion classes. It's just general education. No separate programs that are based by disability or performance level. Services are delivered through collaboration between general and specialized educators or teachers. Academic interventions are for any learner who needs it and include those students with disabilities. So the caveat to that is that if I become identified as a child with a disability and receive special ed services, that doesn't now exempt me from receiving any other academic interventions that children who are non-disabled would receive. And then our last one is planning for students who need more by making sure we're focusing in on membership participation and learning. So our systems change process was developed and piloted beginning in 1990. And it scaled up and was modified through 2016. We continue to refine the process as we apply the work. And we've applied this work in 9 states. We're in Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, Illinois, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Connecticut, Washington, and Mississippi. There are 14 districts that have we've applied this work in. In Arkansas, we've been in Armorall and Drew Central. In Maryland, we've been in Allegheny, Anne Arundel, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Calvert, Charles, Dorchester, Prince George's, Somerset, and St. Mary's. And in Virginia, we've been in Harrisonburg City, and in Oklahoma and Hilldale. So Maryland Coalition has collaborated with the National Implementation Research Network, State Implementation and Scale-Up of Evidence-Based Practice, SISEP, Center for both the National Inclusive Education Center, SWIFT, and Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership Project with the Council of Chief State School Officers. And understanding the 5 active implementation frameworks has allowed MCIE to make connections with our work and research, as well as refine our processes based on the 20 years of implementation science work in the education field. So we've created a priority to practice strategy based on implementation science, as well as connecting our progress within districts to the stages of implementation to ensure our methods have quality, right? So this, which is like microscopic, but if you have the PDF, you can zoom in, is our theory of action. And this is to demonstrate how we work with systemic change with consideration and application of implementation science and evidence-based professional learning and coaching. Let's see. So an example of our school-wide framework. This is the school-wide framework that we have. You'll notice that it has leadership up at the top, and then the tealish blue that you see across the 3 columns and the 3 rows. This is grounded in what we think is essential to be established in order for students with disabilities to be very well included and have a meaningful participation and actually learn. So this framework is the foundation for the inclusive school practices. We use it as a basis for identifying priorities for change. So when we get in a partnership with a school or a district, we ask that school or district to reflect on where are your strengths and where do you think you have opportunities to grow, which may leverage some great impact for your students. This also allows for the further dive into our evidence-based practices so that we can target specific areas for professional learning, for resource development, or any other methods for making change. So through the work that we've had over the years of implementation, we've learned that the keys to success really rely on administrator commitment and support, which is grounded in their understanding of research, law, and having the attitude, beliefs, and mindset for upholding students' learning in general education. We know that building a schedule that supports natural proportions of class placements ensures equitable distribution of student needs, and it prioritizes the education for all students among all educators, not just a few educators. Third key is collaboration among educators and service providers is so essential to the co-planning and co-instructing of students, because no one person is responsible for knowing it all in order to do it all. And so it is critical to have the expertise of the room and not rely on the skills of just one individual. So prioritizing that collaboration for our educators and service providers is essential.
Will you
And then our
remind me,
last,
Brittany? I'm so
sure,
sorry.
that's
Do
okay.
you, I did look through your slides, so I can't remember. Do you share any resources to support the scheduling?
Not today, but we have resources and
Okay.
documents for that, yes.
That
And
is a
further,
very
like
like,
a further explanation of it too,
it's a
yes.
technical challenge that I've experienced myself in school, so that really resonated with me.
Absolutely. And Carol might be able to speak up on whether or not we actually have any of those documents posted on our website. I can't remember if that scheduling with natural proportions is one that we actually have uploaded. I do know we have collaboration resources and on the website.
Yeah,
So
no, it's not. The scheduling isn't. And I just want to note that it's also strongly influenced by the negotiated agreement with if it's a unionized district. That is a huge influence. And so as Brittany's talking about this, all of this school-wide work is directly influenced by district level support.
yeah. I also, now that you've opened that door, Carol, something else that I'd like to add to that is that we have come across, depending on how a particular staff member's position is funded, if they don't have braided funds, sometimes there are barriers for particular service providers either collaborating with other staff members in order to meet the needs of students or actually working in a classroom in order to co-teach. And that was something that personally, based on my experience in education, I was like, what? So that was a learning moment for me, particularly working with other areas, states, or districts.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
there's
and
a
I
dear
think
colleague letter related to funding, if anyone wants to know exactly what the parameters are.
I think that would be a great resource to provide people, Carol.
I love it that you always know these letters better than I do, even being from OSEP. But I do want to say that the point you just made, Brittany, the other place that's coming up in terms of what folks are allowed to do, and it's part of the negotiated agreement conversation, has been when it comes to apprenticeships and grow your own type programs, because the things that need, like say a paraprofessional needs to do in order to be in that is beyond what's been negotiated. So I
Yep.
do think that that effort is potentially going to have show some improvements also in the work that you're trying to do, because they're pushing up against those walls, and it's something that folks, we need personnel, so it's going to help.
Yeah. And I think that as we talk through some of the other structures that we have, it really is how there has to be this ongoing conversation of how do the district and the school levels support each other in identifying the systemic barriers that may prevent particular practices from being implemented.
Yeah. Thanks.
So the last key to success is that we aim for 100% participation. And Carol and I and all of our colleagues, no matter how many times we say it, we constantly get the question or the pushback eventually and throughout all of our work of like, wait, that kid? Yes, that kid. You mean those kids? Yes, those kids. And so while we say 100%, like people really don't get it when you're saying it. So we have learned that it's really important for us to be like, who are all your students, whether they are here or not, is supposed to be in your neighborhood school, and then be like, we're aiming for all of these students to be included in general education. We know that that we won't get there, but if you don't aim for 100, then you are putting a cap on who will be included, and that is not the intent of the work for our students. Nor would it be appropriate for us to be like, we will cap out at 80% and then stop making the effort from working. So that's why you always aim for 100. So the process that we have, this is what I was referring to a moment ago, is really about how do we make sure that we have a well-established partnership with the district, the school, and then what are the tools that we are using with the schools in order to foster meaningful inclusion for our students with disabilities. So to just reveal some of the things that we do with that, one of the ways in which that we are working is our district implementation team is overseeing the implementation, the school implementation, assessing and recommending change in policy or practice. They are working on communication systemically as well as within the community, and they are responsible for sharing the vision, right? And then the next layer is the school implementation team. And so this school implementation team really is about assessing and understanding any of the barriers that might also be coming through the policy and practice that affect them from implementing these particular practices. Also sharing and communicating the vision, but they are working to identify what is needed in order for our students with disabilities who are not included to be included. And that is going to be thought about in two different like silos, or not silos. That's not what we want them to do. Two different areas. Like, what is it that the adults need? And then what is it that we know about our students in order to fuel what it is that our adults need? And then the third component really is the student team. What is it that we know about our students, especially our students with the most complex or significant support needs? And what is it that we do to gain an understanding of who those students are and what are the dreams for those students so that we can ensure that they be included in general education? Because the students are the ones that have to actually live it. The teachers are the ones that are in the trenches actually trying to make it happen. And so the school and the district really need to be in a good communication cycle for understanding how they each support each other. So as we think through our thinking routine, I just want to give a little pause. We don't have very many people in the session, Jennifer and John. Instead of doing breakout rooms, do you think that we could just open the floor for people to think and reflect out loud?
Yeah, and I think this is a group that's comfortable speaking up. Everyone, you know,
Okay.
different groups have different flavors, but this is a group I know everyone and everyone's comfortable speaking up. So I think that'd be great.
So if everybody can refer to those 3 questions that ask them to connect to what was shared, what might they have, what might has extended their learning, and what challenges or questions they may have. And the floor is just open for people to think and share and discuss for a few moments.
I'd love to just start off by saying this was wonderful and amazing. I'm like so thrilled to see like how the big picture of all of these really important ideas represented in your vision really come together in the schools and districts. So this was phenomenal. So thank you. And the piece that just resonated for me when I think about definitely connecting, but even I think there's a lot to learn as we think about extending. What does this actually mean? You talked about what do adults need but that's based on what students need. And it's like a translation of the dialogue that we've been having that really has that firm connection to, you start with understanding the students. And from that lens, you then build for what the teachers need. And I thought that was really, it's interesting, and it's a challenging way for me to be thinking about it. So
Thank you for sharing, Melanie.
Yeah, I wanted to share, could you go back a slide? Because it will help me to reflect on my question, or not really a question, just talk about it. The framework one, the one that has your full framework on it. That one, yes. I think this sort of, I guess it's part question, part comment. Do you do anything specific? Because you said we have these, you're connecting with the school and they're talking through each of these kind of, do you have like a assessment tool or a rubric
Yes.
or?
Yes.
So, because in Pennsylvania, we had something many years ago that kind of talked through,
Mhm.
like what should be done on the school-wide administrative level? What do we look at a scheduling level? What like some of those pieces, and that's how you get them there.
Yeah. So
Okay.
two major things just to ground in your question. We use this framework. We have it on a big canvas, and at a staff meeting, we introduce and review the components just to give people a sense of understanding around it. We give them 2 dots, one of each color. One color is for them to make a decision on if I can only pick one area, where do I think where our strength is? And then the other dot is, if I could improve one area, it does not have to be the area that someone thinks it needs the most growth or is like the worst, right? But if we could improve this one thing, it would give us the biggest bang for our buck. And they put their dot in that. So it gives a great heat map of like this live self-assessment of what the staff thinks about their school. Yes, Carol, she's got it up there. Big old pumpkin thing. Yeah. And so that heat map, number one, automatic visual for the staff. And then we get to debrief it out loud with everyone. And then we write a report up that really summarizes it all. So that's one way that we use the framework. The leadership team then takes that information and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So I'm going to try and minimize how much detail I give around it. But that information is used to fuel an action plan. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. Now, from this framework, and Carol, if I need to explain more about it, please step in. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep this short. Each one of these cells, we have another resource. It's our quality indicators that is aligned to what this might look like. Each one of those cells might look like, so that if a team wanted to dig into one area in particular, we could be like, well, here are 5 things that specifically align to what this might look and sound like, in order to help them to A, have a better understanding of it, or B, for them to say, if we wanted to prove this area, here are the indicators we could use in order to like measure and reflect on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Yeah. Maybe we'll take one more and then we'll continue, because it really is about continuing to understand the work that we have with this. If anyone wants to ask or share one more.
Yeah, I just want to echo, this is just great, like like everything you're doing and going back to your vision. I did have a question about families and family engagement in this work. And if that's like a part of your framework and really including families, and if you ever face some, I don't want to say but like questions, concerns about this from families with their children in these schools, and
Yes.
that they might not go to the vision. So you get the administrators, the teachers, but families saying, actually, I want my child to like
Segregated.
Yeah. Are you
Yes.
experiencing any of that?
So backing up just a little bit, the way in which we incorporate our families is on a more individual level. So our district team and our school leadership teams do not have family or outside of the school system participants. So what I mean on an individual level is that if we had a student with complex support needs, one of the ways in which we do customized learner planning is through the making action plans maps planning process, which is grounded in bringing in the family and the student to really talk about their hopes and dreams. And so that offers a platform for parents to make sense of what it would take to include their child, as well as a school system. But from there, then the school would work on planning, because what we don't want to do is we want our school systems and district to have the security and safety in order to acknowledge barriers and then create space for brainstorming and moving them. And when you include outside participants in that process, sometimes that jeopardizes the safety to be able to be real about what's going on in your system.
I
And
would
the
only,
second part of your, oops, sorry.
Whoops. Well, I would only add that sometimes it really is based on the district. We might, like there's a district we're working with now, and we engage families initially in a focus group to identify concerns as well as any, strengths that parents had. And in another district, we follow the lead of the district. So like in this first one, we're encouraging them to do community forums with us. And they really don't want to because they're afraid of opening up and getting more, not just input, but more emotional stuff going on in the backdrop when they haven't really moved that far yet. So they haven't really experienced success. They're at the very beginning. Other times we have had a district that formed an advisory group that met quarterly, and it was kind of a, here's some information, and then structuring questions for them to give us their input.
One of the things that I want to respond to that you asked about with parents pushing against their children being included, we do not pressure schools or particular teams to force inclusion on a family that is firm in not wanting to include their child. We don't encourage them to end up in due process over something like that. We do encourage them to continue to work through a communication plan for educating their community and informing their community, and always aligning decision-making to the law. Thank you for that question, Laura. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, let's continue. So the additional questions that are guiding questions. So what data do you use to indicate needs, progress, and impact? And then the adaptive and technical leadership. How have you engaged critical perspectives to overcome barriers to include students with disabilities? What questions and strategies have you used to approach adaptive challenges? So those answers, we're going to answer those questions through the next bout of information. So when it comes to inclusive practices, we are thinking now through, we've talked about, we have a district team and we have a school leadership team, and then we have tools for supporting individual learners with complex support needs, among other tools, right? So what we're talking about now is honing in on the school level. So all of the things that we're talking about is the way in which the school leadership team works through this process, because the ultimate goal is for them to identify particular practices that need to be implemented in order for the teachers to feel equipped in order to meet the needs of the students and have those structures and supports. So we work through stage-based implementation. And so we have our discovery and design, prepare and install, partial implementation, and full implementation. And we talked, and you saw on a slide previously that our work with school systems is typically 1 to 3 years, sometimes more if they choose to engage in the work with us. So that aligns with our work. So in the year 1, we are doing discovery and design, and we're preparing to install. The second year is partial implementation, because we know that you've got to go small so you can go big, because what we want to make sure is that while we want our successes to be big, we know that if you go big, your failures are big. So let's make sure that our failures, which means that we are learning about what does not work and how to refine and adjust our practices, are on a smaller level so we can scale up, right? To ensure that those practices are well implemented from the go. Collateral damage needs to be smaller. when you are working through the initial stages for what you are planning, because we're talking about identifying things based on what we currently know and what we currently think. And so the flexibility to be able to start small so you can go big is also feels very safe to take risks. Year 2, continuing with that partial implementation, reflecting, thinking about what is working and what is not, and making those adjustments, and then full implementation in year 3. It doesn't stop there, though. You then cycle back up to your discovery and design. Are we still in the place where we need to be? Is there more to do in order to ensure that we understand our student needs, in order to ensure our staff have what they need? So this process is ongoing at the school level. For that school leadership team, that year 1, when we're talking about the design and discovery, some of the agenda items and activities that we do in order to get to the action plan for implementation are listed here. So how are we making decisions about data? And we'll talk a little bit about all of this in just a minute. Develop a shared understanding about inclusive education. What collaborative team practices are we installing to ensure effective, meaningful decision-making? Because this is the school's work, not MCIE's work. We are the catalyst for change. It is the school's work and efforts that really make the sustaining work, so they have to own it, which is grounded in how do we establish those collaborative practices. We would be remiss to be making an action plan without getting input from our staff and without understanding our students. So that's why the decisions about data and our staff input are so critical. In the staff input, you'll see that we've got beliefs, strengths, opportunities, barriers, and facilitators. Those are all grounded in specific activities that we facilitate in that year 1 in order to get the input from our staff to inform our action plan. When it comes to actually applying and going small, we need to identify a target grade or grades, and really making sure that we understand who our learners are and who our staffs are in those subjects or grades in order to know who to identify. So there's no like cut and dry answer for who you target. It's not like if you're in elementary school, we're going to start pre-K and work our way up, which seems logical, but that might not be the best approach, or it might be the literal best approach. So it's up to the team to really work through a discussion to figure that out. And then we also ground, MCIE needs to understand the culture and climate of the school that they're working in. And we also need to understand and know who the students are, with especially the students with complex support needs, in order for us to be informed, supportive technical partners in this work. And all of that leads to an action plan that the school leadership team develops. And the school action plan is where we identify the specific practices that need to be done. So we talked about data. You'll see this dot activity was that big old canvas that Carol showed, and that's grounded in our framework. There's also a gallery walk that we facilitate in order to identify specific questions that will inform our leadership team of what maybe professional learning needs to be identified, the areas that the teachers feel that they need or want more information about. And that's where those key questions are coming from. We have a survey, a belief survey that we administer at the beginning of the year, and we summarize in a report. That's also information that is grounded in what people believe in about educating students with disabilities in general education. And then the team identifies specific student data that they want to engage in order for them to make sense about where their student strengths and areas of support might be needed. So that's what we're talking about when it comes to data and how we use it to inform our decision making. And then previously we talked about identifying a way for selecting priorities and the specific practices associated with that. So the leadership team uses the data to select priorities. Those priorities are then defined, prioritized, and targeted. And we have a process, right, Carol? We got a process. It is time consuming, and it is hard brain work, and it is fascinating to watch the school leadership teams work through it. So we use that process to define, prioritize, and target the specific priorities. And further discussion is had through a series of questions. And those are grounded in the staff competencies, the organizational capacity, and the leadership strategy. the leadership strategies in order for us to really get to the design of things. So I'm kind of skipping that last image just for a moment, because up to this point, we now need to ask, what are the actual practices that are critical for supporting students with disabilities? And before I show that last part of the graphic, really it's grounded in 3 areas. We need to know specific individual learners with complex support needs so that we can customize planning to support their inclusion. We need to identify the instructional practices based on all that data input and that priorities to practice work that our team did. And then we need to identify any school structures that can be refined, removed, or implemented in order to meet the needs of the adults, in order to meet the needs of the students. And so that's where we really get our design for how do we plan for our students, how do we implement the specific educator practices into our actual action plan. So it might look like this, right? Plan for our individual learners. Who are they? What challenges or barriers exist? What supports can be identified? And then what collaborative learner planning tools can we use to ensure students are meaningfully and responsibly included in general education? This is where B is where we take all that input from our staff and student data to determine what are the actual instructional practices that we are going to improve or install. And the examples are not it. They are examples. It might be that we are going to focus on universal design and instruction. It could be, how do we prioritize cooperative, flexible group instruction, cooperative learning? What are the co-teaching and collaborative planning, and how do we actually adapt instruction, as that is the definition of specially designed instruction? And then you can see for the third part of our action plan, this is where we would identify school structures to develop and change. And going back to something Jennifer teased out earlier, which was so often one of the #1 things that we tackle in our school systems is scheduling with natural proportions. It's the linchpin for ensuring student need is equitably distributed, so that you don't have certain classes that are overly dense with student need, but also that we are rethinking how we utilize our adults to meaningfully collaborate and co-plan or deliver services and instruction. So when it comes to the ways in which we are working as MCIE and the structures and processes that we've done, what are further connection? What is the time? What are the further connections, extensions, or challenges that you have thought about as shared information?
I just want to elevate that. I love how this really allows each school to shape the work in so many ways. Like, you have it really so that they are guiding and leading the work based upon, what is happening in that individual school and that unique. I love how you were mentioning the shared decision about data and how to make decisions about data and use the data. Do you ever, from your project lens, are you ever collecting data that you need to show the impact of your work? And how do you do that if everyone's doing such different, unique things? Is that, yeah.
I see Carol reaching for the mouse. Would you like to respond to that, Carol?
It's interesting, often, and we don't have this actually embedded as a routine initially, but when we do ask, like, how will you measure success? And that usually comes out at Brittany, noted there's 3 years of implementation in the first year, and people have a hard time articulating it. And even though there are some people who will say, well, if they're not making academic progress, how do we know it's working? And then others who will say, well, they're going to make academic progress. If somebody's teaching you, you will learn something. And in a district where Brittany came from, they really tried to look at the difference between performance and self-contained versus kids who are included. and sometimes they'll say, well, it's not about academics, it's really about, a sense of belonging and other kinds of things. So having said that, we don't have a routine way of evaluating the impact, except that if they identify priorities, they can then go into that section of the quality indicators for the initial purpose of identifying what might they want to do, because it says the indicator and what it might look like. But we can also administer that again 3 years later to see if those indicators have a different rating, because the rating is on a stage of implementation rubric. We also have the belief survey, and when we have administered that, we wait at least 1.5 to 2 years, and we have seen change. Now, the composition of the school could change as teachers come and go, but nonetheless, we're looking at school-wide, aggregate scores or feedback. And then placement, we always do look at placement because a lot of other systems change approaches that we've seen focus on professional learning. And that doesn't mean kids move. And there are some big projects where they're focused a lot on engagement of adults and the kids don't move. So we are very focused on having them target students to move with family agreement.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's that like the nuance allowing it, but also being able to collect other data like more broadly. If no one, I had one other question. Your vision earlier had the no inclusion classrooms, and it goes to that last point that you were just bringing up about scheduling and that need. And I know in schools that I used to work in, we called them co-taught classrooms. So they were not called inclusion classrooms,
Yep.
but to ensure that there were 2 teachers that co-taught for the scheduling purposes. Do people like, how do you, is it just changing the nature, or how do you address that? Because I think that's something like changing that belief and vision, but also getting people and resources. Yeah, any thoughts?
Yes. So, one of the districts that we've worked in, they used to actually have at the high school, middle school level, a course code that was the co-taught section. And that eventually went away because the idea is that when you schedule with natural proportions, you are gifting the next grade level with the potential best distribution and staff assignment as possible. However, the skill set of the staff and the needs of the students are always ebbing and flowing and changing. So it is a guess, which means that the schedule is flexible and live. So while there might be a co-taught class that is every day, a special educator and a general educator for the entire course or period or what subject or whatever the structure is, depending on the level of the school, it could be that after the first quarter, they're like, I only need you in here 2 days a week and only for 30 minutes in order for the needs of the students to be met. And so what that has really helped as people learn how that flexibility of the scheduling really is about meeting the needs of the adults and the students. That has helped us remove that language. Plus, we just say it. There's no inclusion class, no class is co-taught. That is Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so's class that has additional staff supporting it, whatever. And so we just work on language and use and grounding ourselves in the definition and understanding of that. And it takes time, Laura.
Yeah, I
It takes
love
time.
that because I can just see how schools shift the language, but they're still meaning the same thing and can keep moving it. So it's really getting to that belief. So I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm grateful. Thank you. And so just to wrap things up, because we have 2 minutes, thank you, Carol. Historical procedures and practices for providing services in segregated settings really are based on the misinterpretation of IDEA, coupled with ableist mindsets, attitudes, and beliefs. And segregation, in my opinion, segregation has replaced the special in special education. And there's over 40 years of research which proves that it's best for non-disabled as well as students with disabilities to learn together in general education. So the question, the barrier that I would love for this team to just poof solve would be, how can we build capacity with our special educators and other leaders to understand and uphold the legal meaning and intention of special education services, including specially designed instruction, to prevent and significantly limit segregation of students with disabilities? That's my big question. So I really appreciate everyone's time and listening and thoughts. And if anybody has any last minute ideas or reactions, I'm done. The
Damien
floor is
does.
yours.
Damien.
No, my knee-jerk response to what you just said is that you focused on special educators, and it really has to start with general educators. It has to start with educators in general. And I really think that's a challenge we have. And like very often when we do presentations around this, recently our county superintendents, one of the veteran superintendents said to me, like, this is a great presentation. You should show this to the county special ed directors. I'm like, they've seen it before. They know that this is the issue. The issue are the principals. The issue are the supervisors of instruction in the gen ed classroom who are asking questions like, well, like, what are we, no, that kid doesn't belong in this class. You know, that's, and again, that's one piece of the puzzle, but I think that's a huge piece of it, is really getting the right people at the table around general ed instruction, you know.
Yes. I think we're gonna say a resounding yes, absolute agreement. I don't think we have time for the answer right now, but I think we can explore that next time as well. So thank you for raising it, Damien.
This was a great presentation. Thank you guys so much. This was really great.
Brittany, you make systems processes fun. Thank you for sharing in such an engaging way and for being a good thought partner with me as we create this series. And thank you, Carol, for your support as well. And we will continue the conversation. There's a lot to dig into after today. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Close to me, enjoy the snow.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, bye.